another shanty. That was a halyard shanty. I'll do this. This is a pumping shanty, and it was used at the end of the voyage. It was the time when all the sailors could complain because there wasn't much they could do to them. They'd be in port, and they'd have to pump the ship dry. One of the things about wooden-hulled vessels is they take on a lot of water, and if you don't get that water pumped out of there, they sink. So this is like a pumping shanty, and it was done at the end of the voyage. It's called Lever, Johnny, Lever. Oh, I thought I heard the old man say, leave her, Johnny, leave her. You can go ashore and draw your pay. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Oh, leave her, Johnny, leave her. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow. It's time for us to leave her. Our ship is old, she will not last. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Our ship is old, she's sinking fast. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Oh, leave her, Johnny, leave her. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow. It's time for us to leave her. Well, it's rotten meat and we will eat bread. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Well, it's pump or drown, the old man said. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Oh, leave her, Johnny, leave her. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow. It's time for us to leave her. Well, a mate was a bucko and the old man a Turk. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Well, the bosun was a devil with a middle name of work. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Oh, leave her, Johnny, leave her. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow. It's time for us to leave her. Well, the mates have gone and we the crew. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Well, it's time, me lads, that we went to. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Oh, leave her, Johnny, leave her. For the voyage is done and the winds don't blow. It's time for us to leave her. Leave her, Johnny, leave her. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me just grab this. No.
A round of applause for our musical entertainment, Bill Dempsey. And we want to try and start the program very on time this evening. So to that end, welcome to a unique, it happens once in 100 years event. The Dana Point Historical Society is proud to sponsor the Bicentennial of our favourite Dana. Board member Keith Johannes talked to Dan Stetson at the Tall Ships Festival last year and said, you know, what plans do the Ocean Institute and Pilgrim have for the 200th birthday of Dana? And so it began. With the help of the county, the city, the Harbour Department and the Ocean Institute, we are here at this special venue. Thank you to the presenters seated beside me and behind me. Also, I'm going to ask a few people if they just would stand and be recognized when I read their names. I'd really appreciate it. I'd like to thank Sherry Murphy and Julia from the city. Sherry is a recreation manager, and she managed to get our PA system working so beautifully this evening, so thank you both. Tracy Kirby is probably on the dock somewhere, but she has been our Ocean Institute connection and has been wonderful to us, so thank you to Tracy. To Bill Dempsey for our musical entertainment. And a special thanks from me personally to one of our presenters that you'll hear this evening, and he's become a dear friend of the Historical Society, Bob Minty. He has his contribution of the Sounders Theatre program, part of it is all his doing. He was the one that really clued us into this, so I want to thank Bob Minty. And thank you all for joining us on this special event. I just have a few more introductions I would like to make before we actually make the program begin. Dana Murphy is here, a planning commissioner from the city of Dana Point. Dana, sorry, I mispronounced that. No, I don't see her. Nancy Jenkins is seated up here. She's on the Arts and Cultural Commission. Two of the lovely ladies in the back, Heather Johnston and Vicky McMurchie. Could you stand from the Chamber of Commerce? Thank you for being here. And then three special introductions that people perhaps you know and perhaps you don't. If you come to our annual reading of 2 Years Before the Mast, you might know Kathy Carlisle, Faith Lawson, and her mother Jane. Could you stand, please? And the most special thing about them is they are all Dana descendants. So thank you for being with us. So, one city, the only Dana Point in these United States, named for the man being remembered this evening. Yes, for a book he wrote as a young man, but also for being the conscience of a nation as a lawyer and a man of genuine character and courage in a time of great upheaval. So we begin our program. We're standing on this, or near, this beautiful brig Pilgrim, courtesy of the Ocean Institute, and to that end I want you to welcome Dan Stetson, who is the retiring director of the Ocean Institute, and he'll say a few words and has some introductions of his own. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my ship. Because for me, this is where it really started. I started at the Ocean Institute 22 years ago, almost to this day, and my first responsibility was Pilgrim. And so she holds a very, very special place in my heart. Every year, thousands of kids come aboard this program and they're changed. The experience that they have is something that they'll remember for a lifetime. So my job when I came here was to take the program here and to take it to other places. We had an office up in San Francisco, so I was going back and forth between here and San Francisco. Then we started a program down in San Diego on the Star of India, and then also started a program over in Honolulu on the Falls of Clyde. And my wife has still never forgiven me because I never took her there on any of those trips. But anyway, this is really such a wonderful ship, and I just want to take a quick second to thank all of you. I've been president for the last 10 years and couldn't have worked and accomplished as many things as our team has done without each and every one of you here. I mean, everyone from our volunteers, our board, our staff, our city members, and of course our counties. So please give them all one very, very large round of applause. And of course, one of our very, very early volunteers, back when the Institute, back when the gift shop When the cash register was just a coffee tin, she was a volunteer here. And when the Pilgrim was anchored out in the middle of the harbor, her husband would row people back and forth for the performances that were taking place out on the ship. She went on to become the first mayor of Laguna Niguel. And then, of course, we know that she went on to many, many things after that. But she's always had a wonderful spot in her heart for the Ocean Institute. So please give a very great round of applause for Senator Patricia Bates.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. That was probably one of the best jobs I ever had, was, selling things and using that muffin cup and helping all of this get started. Volunteers are certainly the lifeblood of communities, and they make things happen. And certainly when we see all of you here today and what the Historical Society has done, I am humbled truly with all that's gone on here from those early days when Stan Cummings and I met. He had a crazy little van all psychedelically printed, and I met him over at one of the restrooms, and he said what he's going to do, and I said, really? Well, we'll see if that happens, and certainly it has happened, and look at all of you. So I have with me a certificate of recognition today from our state senate, recognizing the Dana Point Historical Society for their work in preserving the memory of Richard Henry Dana Jr. And certainly they deserve a huge round of applause. The volunteers that have been involved in this historical society have really made the name of Richard Henry Dana remembered in up and down our state as one of, I have to say, one of the founding members of our great state, who brought that kind of recognition here from the East Coast. So to whom may I present this to our President Barbara and Liz, and let you guys know that we did start a historical society in Laguna Niguel, and we're following your playbook. We don't have the same kind of history, but you guys have raised the bar and set the mark for us, so we thank you for that. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
And then next presenter is the esteemed, wonderful mayor of the city of Dana Point, Carlos Olvera. Carlos.
Thank you, Pat. This being Richard Henry Dana's birthday, there are going to be a lot of cities, wherever he touched the ground, that are probably celebrating the actual same thing. Dana was here. Well, we got him beat because we have his name. So what I'm presenting to the Historical Society is a proclamation from the city of Dana Point for taking the opportunity of celebrating this day in honor of Richard Henry Dana, and for the job that they have done, which is well done. And now I'm going to introduce Brad Gross, our director of the OC Director at Dana Point Harbor.
Thank you, Carlos. It's nice to be here tonight. Long before Dana Point became a city, San Juan Capistrano always had a close relationship with San Juan Point and its community. The roots go back to when the Yankee trading ships hauled into the bay, trading hides from the mission, bringing Dana to these shores. San Juan Point became Dana Point in 1884. When the County of Orange began developing the harbor, Capistrano Valley resident H.L. Les Bremers and the San Juan Capistrano Historical Society decided they wanted to contribute something to commemorate this historical connection between San Juan Capistrano and the bay. A limited competition of renowned sculptors was held once a statue of Dana had been decided upon, and they selected John Turkin of New York to do the work. Many fundraisers were held for donations, including from Dana's relatives and local schools. Helen Dana Swanner, a distant cousin, was the first with a substantial donation. Cost of the first statue exceeded $20,000. The statue was sculpted in East Meadow, New York, and unveiled on April 28, 1972. With great help from the Orange County Board of Supervisors and especially Vice Chair Lisa Bartlett, the Dana Point Historical Society is pleased to dedicate a new plaque celebrating Dana's Bicentennial and acknowledging the work of the San Juan Capistrano Historical Society under the leadership of Les Remmers to establish a landmark in the city of Dana Point. And with that, I'd like to introduce Barbara Johannes, the president of the Dana Point Historical Society.
The Historical Society wants to thank Brad for all of his help in taking our application to have this bicentennial plaque on the Dana statue in the harbor. And now we get to order that, but this is the official date that we are announcing that we will have that plaque on his birthday, August 1st, 2015. It has also been my privilege to correspond with the author of a new biography on Dana. It's the first biography on Richard Henry Dana in over 50 years, and it's time for today, Dana's birthday. If you happen to have read his article in yesterday's Los Angeles Times op-ed section, you will want to attend his Dana Talk on Wednesday, September 16th at 6:30 p.m., co-hosted by the Ocean Institute and the Historical Society in the Samueli Conference Center here at the Ocean Institute. Jeff will also appear during the Tall Ships Festival the weekend of September 12th and 13th. Jeff Amestoy has served as Chief Justice of Vermont and of the Vermont Supreme Court, as the State District Attorney before that, and he is a fellow at the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. Book reviews state that Amestoy has provided new insight into Dana's work as an advocate for the common seaman and in defense of fugitive slaves at a cost of his prestige with Boston's Brahmin high society in his day. Few of us are familiar with Dana's legal prominence in defending Lincoln's Civil War powers and prosecuting Jefferson Davis for treason. Dana's life is a compelling story, and Amestoy describes his fascinating life beyond his formative 2 years before the mast. This is the book, and you are all invited to come and hear Judge Amestoy talk about Dana September 16th. So please put that on your calendar. It is now my honor to introduce former Dana Point Mayor Wayne Rayfield, who will take us back to Dana's centenary celebration. Please imagine that it is 1915 and you are there.
Fellow citizens, we have met this evening to recognize the centenary of Richard Henry Dana. Can any of us recall a meeting held in memory of a private citizen and who in his day was not the subject of popular applause? Indeed, though a citizen of public spirit and rare devotion to the state, he was defeated in politics and denied by the Senate a cherished appointment which he sought. The fact that Mr. Dana's fellow citizens meet 100 years after his birth to recall his life suggests that he had qualities not tested by the common idea of success, that he had elements of genius, ideals, and habits of thought which touch the deeper sentiment in such a way as to make his influence more permanent than any of his time who were conspicuously successful. Mr. Dana came of the best and most characteristic New England stock. The spirit of liberty and equal rights for all men before the law were so wrought in the fabric of his being that his soul went afire whenever this passion was upset. His imagination and love of liberty compelled him to press into the field of international relations in the hope that there might be built up a system of international comity and justice, which since his days has grown in strength and won favoring sentiment throughout the world, but which during the past year has been rudely shaken. Mr. Dana had the capacity of observation and of revealing to others in simple language what he saw, thus bringing him beside the reader to share the vision he wished to express. That faculty of genius runs all through 2 years before the mast. We may gain a fuller understanding and conception of that literary genius as we listen to Professor Bliss Perry on Dana as a man of letters.
The popular impression of Richard Henry Dana is that he was a man of one book. It is one of the ironies of literature, this son of a poet, inheriting so much that the finest old England culture, a pupil of Emerson, trained at Harvard, toiling gallantly in a great profession, a public-spirited citizen of a commonwealth, which he served so notably, and without tangible reward, should be chiefly reminded as his record for an enforced holiday of his boyhood, by what he himself called a parenthesis in his life. But the irony, as happens so often with irony, serves to reveal a fundamental law. It explains the author's nature. In that parenthesis, Dana unconsciously expressed himself. His 2 years as a common sailor offered him the magical human chance, and he took it. 2 years before the mast belongs to the literature of escape. He intended a descriptive narrative of objective fact, to present the life of a common sailor at sea as it really is. And the task was perfectly suited to his simple, earnest nature, to his lucid mind and style. The real romance of adventure revealed itself gradually. Books had prepared the way. Young Dana knew his Spencer and Byron, Wordsworth and Scott. It is characteristic of his generation that he finds Robinson Crusoe's island on his outward voyage the most romantic spot on earth in his eyes has ever seen, and that San Juan is the only romantic spot in California, and that he experienced here a glow of pleasure of finding what poetry and romance I ever had in me had not been entirely deadened by the laborious and frustrating life I had led. No artificial literary plot could be better curved than the outward voyage of the brig Pilgrim in about 1834. The timeless sojourn in the new land of California, then the long beat homeward of the ship Alert around the Horn and up past the equator and into the Boston Harbor in September 1836. He made his selections, of course, from the diary of experience, but that instinct for essential point, which afterward made him a good lawyer, is evident in the orderliness. He is sometimes like Kipling, over-technical, but is due to his honest, boyish enthusiasm for the right name of every rope. He writes at age 39, after sailing voyage to the Maine coast, "I believe I was made for the sea, and all my life on shore is a mistake. I was intended by nature for a general roamer and traveler by sea and land, with occasional edits of narratives, and my duties as a lawyer, scholar, and publicist are all out of the way." Once on the homeward voyage, there came to him an experience thus described. "One night, while we were in the tropics, I went out on the end of the flying boom jib upon some duty, and having finished it, turned around and lay over the boom for a long time, admiring the beauty of the sight before me. Being so far up from the deck, I could look at the ship as at a separate vessel, and there rose from the water, supported only by the small black hull, a pyramid of canvas, spreading out far beyond the hull, and towering up almost as it seemed in the indistinct night air to the clouds. The sea was as still as an inland lake. The light trade wind was gently and steadily breathing from astern. The dark blue sky was studded with tropical stars, and there was no sound but the rippling of the water under the stern. The sails were spread out wide and high. The little skysail, the apex of the pyramid, seemed actually to touch the stars and to be out of reach of human hand. So quiet too was the sea, and so steady the breeze, that if these sails had to be sculptured marble, they could not have been more motionless. How quietly they do their work. There at least is the magical moment. What matters is whether the moment comes early or late in a writer's life. It is all the same, said Marcus Aurelius. Whether a man looks on these things 3 years or 100. No, it is not quite the same. Surely that man is to be envied who has seen the vision of beauty and has had the felicity of recording it in the days of his youth. Thank you.
One of the greatest tests of moral courage is in the readiness of a man of high position to give up that position for a cause. It called for great courage in the early 50s to be an anti-slavery leader. But at that time, the anti-slavery people, most of them, had very little social position. Mr. Dana took great satisfaction in his dissent and his social position. Therefore, when he entered the ranks of the anti-slavery leaders, he showed exceptional moral courage, for in those days it meant ostracism from many whose company he counted dearest and whose regard he highly esteemed. It is the story of Mr. Dana as an anti-slavery leader that Mr. Moorfield's story will tell us this evening.
Thank you, Bishop. During the 4 years of Civil War, our souls were tried, and our hearts were very sore. For we knew that the future of our country and the freedom of a race were at stake. And our hopes rose and fell as the varying forces of war, now discouraged, now cheered us. The souls of the men who began the war against human slavery were put to the supreme test of courage and endurance. No popular sympathy upheld their hands or cheered their efforts. Strange as it seems to us, 50 years since the fall of Richmond, the public opinion of the United States before the Civil War supported human slavery, was blind to its atrocities, and regarded its opponents as enemies of society. Dana was a free soiler. The Free Soil Party was active in the 1848 and 1852 presidential elections. Their leadership consisted of former anti-slave members of the Whig and Democratic Party. Its main purpose was opposing the expansion of slavery in the Western territories, arguing that free men on free soil composed a morally and economically superior system to slavery. Mr. Dana was one of the few who left the Whig Party and attended the Free Soil Convention in Buffalo, which nominated Van Buren and Adams. Into this independent movement, he threw himself with all his might. And while the result of the effort, if measured by the votes cast during the election, was insignificant, nevertheless, it sounded the death knell of the Whig Party and sowed the seed from which the Republican Party was soon to spring. Every instinct of this conservative lawman and churchman, this believer in the Constitution and law, made him a supporter of existing institutions and opponents of agitators and fanatics. But when Texas was annexed and the slave owners, growing more arrogant, they passed the fugitive slave law. That's when Dana rose to the emergency. There were men who could not submit to such a travesty of law. Men in whose hearts and minds the spirit of Anglo-Saxon freedom was too deeply rooted. And among them, Mr. Dana was a leader. His opportunity came one evening when a Negro living in Boston as Frederick Jenkins was arrested and as a fugitive slave under the name of Shadrach. And Mr. Dana in his diary states what followed. He says, "While in my office at about 10:30, Mr. Charles Davis, Parker, and others came in and told me that the marshal had a fugitive slave in custody in the United States courtroom before George T. Curtis as commissioner. I went immediately over to the courthouse. Now, he did not wait for a summons, but without hesitation volunteered to defend the unfortunate Negro against the power of the United States, a step which affected his whole future. From that time on, to quote his own words, he had the privilege of being counsel for every fugitive slave and for most of those who were indicted for rescue. And he discharged his duty as counsel with unflinching courage, great ability, and in most cases, success. It is impossible for us to now realize against what obstacles and at what sacrifice he did this work. The men whom Dana served belonged to the weakest class in the world. They had neither votes, nor property, nor influence, not even the rights of human beings. They could give him no compensation for his services. And when it was offered to him by others, he responded in a letter, returning the money, saying, "I hope the members of the bar in Massachusetts will never fail to be ready to render this service gratuitously to the cause of humanity and freedom." His partner, Francis E. Parker, wrote after Mr. Dana's death, "Baffled as he has been for more than 20 years, disappointed in every high ambition in his life, fallen in evil times, fallen in evil tongues, how bravely he kept his courage. Let us hold him up to the generous youth of this country as an example of the highest success, and say with Mr. Adams, his connection with those cases was one of the great professional and political acts of his life. It was simply superb. There is nothing fairer or nobler in the long, rich archives of the law, and the man who holds that record in his hand may stand with head erect at the final bar of judgment itself." Bishop?
Thank you, Mr. Story. No son of Harvard is more welcome than Mr. Choate. His loyalty to Harvard is expressed in a characteristic remark some years ago when he said, "When in London, if I heard the name of any young man rising to distinction in America, I always took up the quintennial and looked to see in what year he graduated." Well, we have just heard the eulogy of Rufus Choate by Mr. Dana, and we can be confident that if Mr. Dana could speak today, he would be much gratified to know that his position as a lawyer and a jurist was to be presented by Joseph Choate.
I regarded it as a great honor to prepare a paper about Richard H. Dana as a lawyer and a citizen for the centenary of his birth. He has been dead for 34 years and sleeps in the old Protestant cemetery at Rome in company with Shelley and Keats in a he loved to visit and where his closing years were spent. At such a distance of time, the professional life and work of any lawyer, however distinguished, ceases to be of general interest unless connected with events which have become historical and of her surpassing human interest. Fortunately for Mr. Dana, his active professional and public life of 25 years embraced the period of the Civil War and the thrilling events which preceded and followed it, and he was able to render signal services to the state and the nation, which ought never to be forgotten. From the beginning to the end of his professional life, whatever his hands found to do, he did it with all his might. His attention to details was extraordinary, and thus he was always in danger of overwork, which compelled him to take frequent vacations to counteract that danger. There was one great hero with whom these vacation rambles brought him into close and interesting contact, and that was John Brown, a plain and rugged farmer of North Elba in the Adirondacks, where he ran an active branch of the famous Underground Railroad, over which he was constantly conducting fugitive slaves to freedom. It is pleasant to read of Mr. Dana sitting down to dinner with Mr. Brown and his unlimited family of children, and among them 2 fugitive Negroes whom he introduced to Mr. Dana as Mr. Jefferson and Mrs. Waite, as persons of entire social equality. Little did he think that in a few years the rugged farmer who sat at the head of the table and entertained him so cordially would have become the great martyr of freedom. After the labors of the summer of 1853 as a member of the Constitutional Convention of Massachusetts, Mr. Dana took a holiday and had his first glimpse of Europe, to which he had long looked forward with eager anticipation. To be sure, it only lasted for 2 months, but he saw and enjoyed and recorded everything. He was just at the age to make the most of it, and so thorough and constant has his reading been all his life about England that he seemed to know it all by heart, and reveled most heartily in all the places and people with which his reading had made him so familiar. He returned at the end of his perfect vacation thoroughly refreshed and renewed to resume the daily work of his profession. From 1856 to 1860 was the best and richest period of his professional life. He had some great cases which attracted wide attention, and one of which, the Dalton case, the cause célèbre of the time, he proved himself a match single-handed against 2 great leaders of the bar, Rufus Choate and Henry Durant, who opposed him, and, but for the 12th dissenting juror, he would have won the case. Those 4 years were much the hardest of Mr. Dana's life, and his constitution proved in the end wholly unequal to the strain. For at the end of them, in spite of the occasional holiday and voyages, he completely collapsed in the midst of an exciting cause, and recalling the experience of his 2 years before the mast, he wisely concluded that nothing less than a voyage around the world would save him. And after a lapse of 15 months, in which he made the circuit of the globe, concluding with a brief glimpse again of England, he returned home, once more in good health, to find his country in the midst of the great campaign of 1860, which resulted in the election of Lincoln and brought on the Civil War. I confess my inability, in the space of time allotted, to do justice to Mr. Dana's lofty character and to his signally noble career, which was guided from first to last by high principle and indomitable courage, a lofty independence of spirit, and a mind always conscious to itself of right. He met with many cruel disappointments. His aspiring dreams were not realized, but take him for all in all. He was a man for whom his native state and country may well be proud and give him a place high among their immortals. I have said nothing of his private and domestic relations, but I cannot refrain from quoting what Mr. Parker, his partner for many years, said when he heard of his death. He was the steadiest of friends, the most indulgent and affectionate to those whom he once honored with his friendship. We may well close this celebration of the centenary of Mr. Dana's birth by commending the study of his pure and dignified life and character to the young men of coming generations. From first to last, the perfect gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Choate. On behalf of the Cambridge Historical Society, may I thank you for your presence. And in your behalf, I thank the Cambridge Historical Society for being the means of giving us such a beautiful revelation of the life and character of Richard Henry Dana. I would also like to thank our presenters tonight, Professor Bliss Perry, portrayed by Mr. Bob Minty, Mr. Moorfield's story, portrayed by Les Hawthorne, and the Honorable Joseph H. Choate, portrayed by Mike Harris. And now it is time to leave the year 1915 and climb into our time travel machine and return to the present. Well, that was quick and painless. Welcome back to 2015. Before introducing our next speaker, I do want to express our heartfelt gratitude to Dan Stetson and the Ocean Institute for making these marvelous facilities, including the brig Pilgrim, available to the Dana Point Historical Society for tonight's celebration. We have just heard, thank you, Dan, thank you to all your staff. We have just heard views of Richard Henry Dana from 100 years ago. It's now time for a more contemporary perspective of this unusual, gifted, and caring man. To provide us this perspective, we turn to a very special person in his own right. Dr. Milt McMenamin lectured on large cruise lines around the world as a historian and as a naturalist. He and his wife Anne have been giving talks at the Ocean Institute for 17 years, capping that a 30-year career in Oregon and California in teaching, also including assignments as a school principal, radio and TV show host, director, Hollywood actor, national political delegate, book author, newspaper columnist, and international travel escort. Dr. Milt holds a BA from the University of Portland and a master's degree and a PhD in communications from the University of Oregon. In spite of all that, he's a wonderfully interesting speaker and a marvelous human being. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my esteemed friend, Dr. Milt.
He walked into his father's study and quietly shut the door behind himself. And he walked over to his father's desk. And his father looked up and recognized something was very wrong. Now he knew his son very well. His son was his namesake, had his own name, Richard Henry Dana. And his son was a good boy, good student. What could possibly be the matter with the second of his 4 children? And the young man looked at his father and said, "I can't take it anymore." His father said, "What's the matter, son?" He said, "Dad, I've had the measles. It affected my eyes. I can't read my books anymore." He said, "I try to read and my eyes feel like 2 burning coals burning out of my head." He says, "I can't do my work at Harvard. What am I going to do?" And his dad looked at him and thought for a moment. He said, "Well, son, I own part interest in a shipping company." He said, "Why don't you get on one of my ships, go out to sea, and see if you can't get your health back?" And Richard Henry Dana thought that was a wonderful idea. So he went down to the docks. Now, he had a choice, mind you. This young fella had a very wealthy father. He could have gotten on a luxury ship. They could have gone to Europe, and he could have had every one of his needs satisfied. They could have kowtowed to him all the way over and all the way back. A luxury cruise? No, sir. Richard Henry Dana took a look at the ships and dock, and he saw one that looked just like this one. And he thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to sign up as a crew member. Oh, he didn't know what he was in for. He got himself all dressed up, you know, the duck trousers and the black vest and the hat and the whole bit. And he went down and he signed up. And they happily took him on board. And right away, he was a bright young fella. He had to learn all about that ship. Bryant and Sturgis had made that ship back in 1825 at the cost of $50,000. Right away, he learned all the stats about the ship. He knew it was 86 feet, 5 inches long, 21 and a half feet across here. He knew that it was a 180 ton, 64 ton displacement. He knew about the two 98-foot masts. He learned everything he could about this ship. And then he got aboard, and they shipped out, and the storm came, and he didn't have his sea legs, and he got sick. He got so sick. Didn't matter. The first mate kept barking orders at him. He had to do everything the first mate wanted him to do, as sick as he was. 3 days. The storm finally passed. He was now just barely beginning to get his sea legs. His eyesight started to get a little better. But he vowed at the beginning, and he kept this vow all the way through his cruise, that he would keep a diary religiously. Every day he wrote down everything that happened to him. And the first exciting thing that happened was when one of his crewmates spied a ship on their stern coming fast towards them, and he said, "Captain, ship ahoy!" And the captain picked up his spy scope, and he looked, and he saw, and it made his heart stop. That ship was not flying any flag, which was an automatic indication it was a pirate ship. So Captain Frank Thompson, 30 years old, he just married a woman, and now he's left on a 2-year trip. But he was a sharp 30-year-old. The first thing he did, he told the person at the helm to go dead to the wind. Get all the wind behind us we possibly can and go straight with the wind. The second thing he did was to get every crew member up there and to drop every single sail, all 14 of them, 8 of them square sails, plus all the rest. Give it all you've got. And the third thing he did was to have his crew get buckets of water, go up on top, and drop water on all the sails. Why? Well, because when you watered down that fabric, it shrunk. It didn't allow wind to go through. It presented a solid surface to the wind, so that when the wind came along, it caught those sails and it gave it the strongest possible push. And can you believe it? The Pilgrim, that little merchant ship, like the truck of today, which carried goods from port to port to port, that little merchant ship outran the pirates. And when they got over the horizon, so they could no longer see the mast, that's when he slightly altered his course to give himself even more distance between those pirates. He was not about to let his cargo get into the hands of pirates. And so they survived. But the next big challenge that Dana writes about is horrific. They're clear down at the bottom of South America trying to negotiate from one ocean to the other around the Horn. Oh, the currents wild, the wind variable and incredibly strong, the storms unbelievable, the icebergs in salt water, 1/7 of it is above the water. In fresh water, 1/10 of it is above the water. The rocks, the islands, one hazard after another. You'd sail like crazy. Suddenly the current changes and pushes you right back to where you started. You catch the wind and you go like mad. Suddenly the wind shifts and it pushes you back where you took them 8 weeks to get around the Horn. At one point, the temperature was 14 degrees below Fahrenheit. Oh, and there was a crewmate, a fellow named George Balmer from England. He was the life of the party of the crew. They loved this guy. The captain told him to go up, as most of the crew had to do. They had to furl the sails and unfurl the sails, unfurl and unfurl, depending on what the winds and the currents were doing. And George was doing his best up there, but George had dressed himself in so many clothes because the temperature was terrible. Everything was iced up. And when George was up there, he was experiencing what all the crew experienced. You know, when the winds blew, currents surged, you didn't have these masts going like this. No, sir. You had them going in a figure-8 pattern, so that no matter how you were holding on, there was going to be a force that would throw you. And George Balmer lost his grip, and the mast flung him into the frigid water. George Balmer was like almost every other crew member on any other ship in those days. He didn't know how to swim. When he went into the water, they never saw him again. Dana and his crewmates were devastated. But the cruise had to go on. And the next great adventure found him in this place right here, San Juan, they called it, part of Alta California. This was Mexico. We're talking 1835. They anchored the Pilgrim right out there, about 3 miles out. They wouldn't dare bring it in. Waves too high, too many rocks. So a fore and aft anchor kept it out there 3 miles out. They send in the longboats right here to Baby Beach. And why? Because right on the top of those cliffs were wagons that came from Santa Ana, from Los Angeles, from San Juan Capistrano Mission, loaded high with cowhides. Each one worth $2. $2 in those days, a lot of money. Well, guess who was the youngest member of the crew? The captain says, get up there, throw those hides down, put them in the longboat, take them out to the Pilgrim. So Dana had to go over here, hand over hand, climb up till he got to the top. Went right back over here, there were the wagons, and he took each one like a frisbee and tossed it over, and they came sailing down, except there were 10 of them that caught the wind and got stuck on the cliff. So Richard Henry Dana took a rope, he tied it to a tree, he let himself down, swinging back and forth, catching each one of those hides and making sure it got down to the beach so his crewmates could stack them on the longboat and get them out. Well, he's looking at 400 feet up there. Can you imagine dropping 400 feet to the ground? So Richard Henry Dana kind of thought that maybe if he went back to Captain Frank Thompson, that maybe the captain would at least say, thank you. No, sir. He got back. Captain Frank Thompson looked at him. kind of curled his lip a little, and he said, "You look like a monkey up there." That's all he ever said. Come to find out, Captain Frank Thompson was mean, cruel, the worst kind. Let me tell you about Sam Sparks, another crewmate. Sam was one of the most lovable guys, but he had a speech defect. He stuttered. He couldn't get the words out. Well, Captain Frank Thompson approached the deck, and Sam suddenly hurt his hand. He was doing some work, and he let out a huge exclamation, and Captain Frank said, "What'd you say?" And poor Sam started to tell him, and he couldn't get the words out. The captain interpreted his reluctance to speak as insolence. So he tore off his shirt. He tied him to the mast, and he whipped him. And one of the other crew members said, "Captain, what are you doing?" The captain was enraged to think that anybody on his crew would challenge his authority. So he grabbed John Linden, who made that comment. He tore off his shirt, tied him to the mast, and whipped him. And John Linden, in the middle of this, looked up to the sky and said, "Oh, please, Jesus, help me." And Captain Frank Thompson said, "Don't you ask for help from Jesus Christ. I'm the captain of this ship. You want something, you come to me, Captain Frank Thompson." Whoa. And Dana had to witness this. A good Christian, Dana was. This blasphemy he'd never seen before. He'd never experienced such an abominable behavior. And he vowed he'd do something about it. But it was the law of the sea, the code, that always said that the captain of his ship was judge, jury, and executioner. He was the god on the ship with power over life and death over any crew member. But Dana vowed he'd do something about it, and he did. Another year goes by. He gets back to Boston. He finishes his studies at Harvard. He becomes a barrister, which you and I call a lawyer. He even went on to get his LLD, a doctor of jurisprudence. He married a girl, Sally Watson. Her name was Susan. They called her Sally. Sally gave him 6 children. He had a wonderful career, but most of his people in society didn't care for him. Because one of the things he did was when the blacks during the Civil War tried to escape to freedom on the Underground Railroad, and they got caught, and they got put in jail, and they got put up before a judge, there wasn't a lawyer in town that wanted to represent these blacks, except Richard Henry Dana. And then the guys on the crews from various ships that would come back sporting the scars that they had to endure from capricious captains. They didn't have the money to buy a prosecutor to prosecute the... Richard Henry Dana took their cases. Abraham Lincoln heard about this fellow. Made sure he got to know him. Read some of his briefs. Clever guy. Good speaker. Got to know him. In fact, at one point, Richard Henry Dana writes, "President Lincoln today put his arm around my shoulder, and he talked to me as if I were his son." Well, when Lincoln was assassinated for 3 weeks, Richard Henry Dana was paralyzed with grief. He had lost his closest friend. But the work goes on. It had to be done. Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, after the Civil War, the North put him in jail, confiscated all his property, broke his health. There wasn't one lawyer that would represent him except Richard Henry Dana. Dana got him off, freed him, got him a job, allowed him to live the rest of his life in dignity. The man had been caught between the pages of history, but he was a good man. And Dana knew it, and Dana helped him, and Dana had a reputation for helping the underdog. And he was wonderful. But you know how he got back at all those captains that treated their crew members so badly? It was his second book, called Friend of the Seaman. In it, they codified every single law that pertained to captains and the relationship to crew members. And he put them all in this book so that every guy on every ship could take this little book with him and knew exactly what his rights were. And that was true all around the world. And to this day, seamen everywhere doff their hats, because the first time in history this had ever been done, where seamen knew their rights. Well, that was Dana. You know, President Grant liked him, wanted him to be ambassador to England. In 1879, his father died at the age of 92. You know, Dana's mother was gone when he was only 6 years old. But now he's going to write his 11th book. He goes to Rome, Italy, gets started on this book on international law, and he gets the flu. Influenza morphs into pneumonia. Pneumonia kills him. He's gone. Oh, but his legacy lives on. This is a man who was noted for his intelligence, his compassion, his contribution to the world of letters, his contribution to the world of jurisprudence. This was a man that we can be proud to name our city after. This is a man who was one of the heroes in American history. And so, my friends, today we celebrate his 200th birthday, and we count our blessings right here in this place affectionately known as Dana Point. Thank you.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Elizabeth Bamatri for studying the Sanders Theater's centenary program and working on the excerpts. It was a much longer program, but we thought maybe it would be a good idea if we shortened it a little bit so you could have some birthday cake right now. So there's birthday cake waiting for you in the barn, and we thank everybody here for celebrating Dana's birthday with us. And you know, it's interesting that Jeff Amistoy makes the point that he would not be surprised that friends who admired 2 years before the mast would gather and celebrate his birthday. That might not have surprised him as much because the book was instantly popular when it was published. He was only 25 years old. He just finished law school, and it was timed, he wanted it to be timed with the opening of his law practice. What would have surprised him is that the place that he described as the only romantic spot on the coast is named for him. That would have surprised him. So thank you for being here tonight and for being residents and guests of Dana Point. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go have some cake.